Welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. Noble Warriors want to interview thought leaders about their journey from being burnout overachievers to reclaiming the joy and purpose so we can learn from them and do the same. My next guest is the co-founder of the Opulent Temple Burning Man Think Camp, who has hosted Carl, Armin, Tiesto, Gorgon City, Hot Since 82, and Diplo, these big name DJs. He's also the founder of Opel Productions, which has been throwing parties with purpose in San Francisco for the last 20 years. He's also a child psychologist for kids in a foster care system for the last 27 years. If you're interested in what he's up to, go to opulenttemple.org. Please welcome Syd Gris.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here, Syd.
Yeah, thanks for the invite to chat.
Yep. So, as a psychologist, as a DJ who hosts parties with a purpose, what does the word transformation mean for you?
Transformation. Well, I certainly see development as an intentional, slow-moving transformation, ideally, which means that, of course, we evolve physically and to varying degrees emotionally, kind of just on the auto clock that our own humanity is on. And then there's a very wide range of transformation that only happens with certain kinds of effort. And, that effort being mental, physical, spiritual, depending on where you're putting your focus. And so I think that, if we want to like jump right into big thoughts, our evolution is very much, in my opinion, connected to transcendence in terms of our mission as humans, in part being to like really get in touch with our eternal nature. And there are varying ways to do that, in my opinion. And that in doing so, there is transformation, and obviously the extent to which one wants to do that varies widely.
Okay, perfect. I love that within 2 minutes we're going to big topics like this. This is what Noble War is about.
Right on.
Fantastic. No small talk. Let's jump right into it. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had talked about various modalities to help us get in touch with that internal nature. So what is your preferred modality? And maybe we can start there.
Sure. Well, just to set a little context, my interest in psychology was definitely along two paths. One being that I felt called to be a person who helped other people within the frame of their mental and emotional world, and always was a good listener and feeling like I wanted to be in service in that way. But also it was definitely also tied to my interest in spirituality and higher purpose and why are we here and what are we doing. And so as I proceeded through college and graduate school, my two tracks were learning how to be a therapist, but also studying the world's philosophies and religions through a psychological development lens, which really, I think, was best encapsulated during my days of studying by transpersonal psychology and the work of Ken Wilber, who's a transpersonal philosopher. And so in reading a lot of his work, I was inspired to do my dissertation around the real life lived experience of long-term spiritual practitioners. And so I interviewed, and I don't know if these names will mean anything to you, but Jack Kornfield, who's a well-known Vipassana teacher, Ram
Mhm.
Dass, who
Oh,
wrote
you
the book.
interview them. That's amazing.
Yeah, Be Here Now.
Wow. That's awesome.
Houston Smith, who was a Christian historical philosopher, writer, a Zen Buddhist who worked out of the Zen Center, people that had really been living the life and so could speak to what was their spiritual transformation like over time. And then I compared their kind of life stories and tried to kind of compare it to Ken Wilber's model of transpersonal development.
Okay. I mean, that's super awesome, by the way. I love that. I didn't know about that. That's amazing. That's great. So
Yeah.
what did you find, in terms of the model versus the lived life, right? The
Yeah.
different biographies. What did you find?
Well, Wilber definitely has been oriented to trying to develop an integrative theory of everything
Hmm.
in which like every historical trend in science, philosophy, religion, and psychology can kind of be embedded into an integral theory.
Hmm.
And of course, the success at that, is a matter of debate amongst the people that read him. I found it to be very interesting, and I think there's something to the kind of generalizing orientations that he put forth in his models. But he was also definitely very criticized for trying to um, lay down a model of predictability in a very idiosyncratic reality of development.
Hmm.
And so what I found was the reports from these folks, and granted, there was, I think, just 6 or 7 of them. So obviously a small sample size, but certainly people that had been living a pretty focused and dedicated spiritual practice for a long time, which was kind of like the requirement for me to, want to interview them. And they certainly had a life course that, in some ways did and in some ways didn't match up with what Wilbur would have sort of put forth as a model of development. And in the way the study was made, I didn't necessarily, and I would love to go back if I was ever able to actually speak more directly to them about various aspects of, in this case, Wilbur's model of development. Um, but I guess I would say, like in broad strokes, some things lined up and some things didn't, which is kind of what you would expect.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we try to generalize something, overall framework, you can track the trend line, but to tie it to a specific person's preference, personification, it's nearly impossible.
Yeah,
So, understandably, of course.
yeah.
So I'm curious, now that you mentioned that, uh, as a seeker myself, a seeker slash finder, now that you have this framework, you've interviewed an extensive amount of time with the extraordinary human beings that really dedicated themselves. How do you match up to your own model? I must. You probably that thought probably got crossed your mind, no?
Sure. In other words, like, how do I apply what was learned into my own like
Your
life practice and orientation?
Yeah, your own psychological development, your development of your consciousness, towards this horizon, as you
Yeah,
call it, the eternal nature of who we are.
yeah. Well, I certainly wish I could report that I was an disciplined and dedicated practitioner of any particular spiritual practice. Because certainly to me, one of the lessons of all of it was, of course, it kind of matters where you put your time and energy, but within a certain framework, what really matters is having some form of practice, right? Some form of yoga. So that could be Christian mysticism, that could be Buddhism, that could be Sufism. Maybe it's atheism with really dedicated holistic approach to the good of humanity. Like, there's all kinds of things. So I guess to answer your question, though, where I have been most influenced is definitely Buddhist psychology and the benefits of mindfulness, and one's relationship with their self-concept and their ego, being a functional necessity, but not something that really has what I would consider actual form. Meaning like there's this idea that we're a ghost in the machine, meaning that we have consciousness, but the self, right? Who is CK? Who is Syd? Like, that's a very almost like ephemeral, if I'm saying that right, malleable idea. And at the same time, we can recognize that aspect that, in so many words, like being too attached to your self-concept is a recipe for suffering. Certainly my work in psychology and work with trauma and work with mental illness certainly also illustrates that you need a ego and self-concept to operate in the world. And if it is too fluid and fragile or damaged, you're going to have all kinds of functional problems. And so, like, living within that paradox is important. I also have certainly been influenced by my Christian upbringing. Like, I was on one aspect of my upbringing, influenced by, I was baptized and we went to church, and you learned about Jesus and everything. And of course, that in large part has been a very mixed bag in terms of its impact on society and the world. There is, I think, some value in the teachings on love and service, because I would see that certainly as super important to both happiness and purpose.
How would you characterize spirituality today?
Boy, I don't know. There's so many places to put one's orientation if you're looking for a spiritual life. And on the one hand, it feels very fractured and splintered. And I would say it's probably hard for what I would lump in a very, general fashion, the educated 30, 40, 50 something person who, of course, believes in science, but also believes in some kind of spirit, God, and purpose, to like find a niche of both community and philosophy that holds them together in any kind of way beyond their own maybe solitary pursuits. Maybe there's cool progressive Christian churches out there that would be aligned with that sort of approach. I don't know. I haven't spent the time to go look. In other ways, I think it's, probably easier if you're going to plug yourself into some kind of spiritual community or sangha, so to speak, that I think Buddhist retreats and meditation sittings are probably the most accessible because they seem less dogmatic and more about like just doing the practice of quieting the mind and opening the heart in order to, develop one's compassion and develop one's mind, and hopefully develop one's ability to not be so attached to like who you are in the world while you're still operating in the world.
So here's something that I grapple with personally. And I love that I'm talking to a professional psychologist. So I wasn't thinking about asking you this question before this. I was going to ask you about Opulent Temple, all these things. But since we're here,
yeah, we can get there.
Yeah. But since we're talking about this, let's go there now. So one thing that I grapple with if you think about a spectrum, obviously this is an arbitrary spectrum. I made it up, a spectrum of agency, self-determination, you know, exerting your will to the universe, kind of way of living. The other side is surrender to the flow of the universe, and whatever happens, to the in service of your own growth and development. So I am Chinese. I am a PhD biomedical engineer. So I was raised in this spectrum, data driven,
Yeah.
self determination, individualistic, all those things, right? Then I had my spiritual awakening. Then I'm open now more towards the general spirituality realm, the surrender to the universe. And I'm also influenced by books like The Surrender Experiment, where he talks about he made a decision to just let the external reality be his guru and trust whatever happens and just go with that. So I don't know. I don't think the answer for me is here, deterministic, or here, totally surrender without agency, so to speak. It's somewhere in the middle. So I'm
Right.
curious from your perspective as someone who is a professional psychologist who helps people finding that healthy middle, as you mentioned earlier. What's your take on articulating this healthy middle?
Right. And the tension that's in there.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, just to cut to the chase, I don't know.
Great.
And I think there's certainly value in being comfortable with not knowing.
Mm.
I certainly believe in, and like, who knows, right? Like, we have all these concepts that maybe they're just really functional self-delusions, or
Mhm.
really they are something. So, for example, intuition. I was going to say, I believe, there's something to intuition, which, at its simplest to me is like you have a gut feeling about something and you follow it. And are you following it because you're intuiting that it would be good for you? Or are you following it because there's some divine plan for you and now you're doing that thing? Like, I don't know. But and this at least ties into Opulent Temple in as much as I certainly had a feeling that I should go do this thing.
Mm.
And like at whatever level that exists, meaning like, oh, it's a surface level, if that would be cool, or it's a deeper level of, oh, this is part of my life's calling, this is part of my purpose, this is part of
Mhm.
why I'm here, this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, I don't know. I do think there's something to, and again, I could categorize this as this is comfort food thought, or maybe it's actually something. And that is Joseph Campbell's idea that if you follow your bliss, then the universe will open doors for you.
Mm.
And that resonates. And one of those things that I don't pretend to know that if that's really a thing or not, but I know I like it. And I feel like it has mostly happened in my own life,
Mm.
meaning that there have been occasions that I, followed a path, followed an intuition, followed a spark, and doors opened up.
Mm.
Now, there are certainly times that they haven't, that I thought, like, wow, man, this is like one of those feelings right now. And so I like, put all kinds of time and energy into it, and the doors slam shut. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, who knows? Maybe there's a lesson there. Maybe I was deluding myself. Maybe that effort will bear fruits in other ways down the road I haven't even seen yet. And then 10 years from now, I'll be like, wow, I was right. And that was just part of the path to get there. I don't
Yeah.
know.
What you're pointing to is something that my ego struggles with, which is I'm a very attached to data driven, right? Scientists and all these things. But the realm that you're speaking about is faith. Like
Yeah.
trust that it's gonna turn out, even though there's no quote unquote evidence around it, no data around it.
Yeah.
So my ego really struggles with that.
Yeah. Well, and this whole idea of purpose, meaning like, is there a plan? Like, is it all laid out for us? Is it utter chaos? Is there order? I don't pretend to know. I really don't like this overly new age idea that everything happens for a reason. Like, that makes me gag a little bit, because
Okay.
it suggests that like everything's been planned out and there's like divine order to all of it and everything happens for a reason. And like, no, actually, well, maybe, okay, everything can happen for a reason. It doesn't mean it's a divine reason, right? If I trip on the sidewalk when I leave here today, did that happen for a reason? Well, maybe it's just because I wasn't paying attention, right? As opposed to some greater purpose. And so I would like to think there's both order and chaos. You know, I would like to think there is some purpose and there's a whole lot of room for maneuvering. And I don't know if we're living out a divine plan or if there's absolutely nothing. I don't know. Like, you almost gotta, you know, go with the mental constructs and concepts that work for you in your life. And I think it's really hard to exist and keep your chin up thinking that there's no point to anything.
And to that point, if you think about, again, right, totally material, totally supernatural, I personally don't subscribe. I mean, on the macro, as you know, there's a God, yes, all that stuff. But on the micro, day to day, I'm more about the narratives. You know, what is the narrative that empowers me? So
Yeah.
the narrative of, hey, there's a lesson in my tripping over the sidewalk here, that makes me feel better ultimately. Versus like, oh, there's no reason, or you know, God wants you to trip and fall, like so on the micro, I'm all about extracting what is the lesson, what's the insight, so that way I can be more functional in the world. But in terms of the supernatural, how it impacts my life, making certain decisions, or here's the divine download for CK, on the day to day, that's not the world that I live in. So I don't know if there's a way to articulate that school of thought, but that's the best of my ability to articulate that.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I like it. And it reminds me of certain feedback that I'll give clients in the context of therapy, because we're all cursed to make meaning. You know, we're all telling ourselves stories about what happened and why we did something and why someone did something to us. And that's not to say there's not some objective truths in those things. There are, but there's also a lot of subjectivity that we bring to our narratives and our storytelling. And so when you tell yourself certain stories, be careful of what story you're telling yourself, because you don't always know that that's totally true. And it matters the words that you think to yourself. It matters the belief system that you automatically subscribe to without some perhaps healthy skepticism and self-questioning. And of course, that can all be taken way too far, right?
Yeah,
We have like paralysis by analysis.
that's right. I read what is it, the Turkish coffee residues, and trying to, you know, make something work, like, oh, this Turkish coffee stain means whatever else in my life.
Right.
Anyways, no judgment there. If that's what people believe, that's cool. I do want to bring it back to Opulent Temple. So I read somewhere on your blog, or you know, the interviews that has been done with you, that your original intention is to make parties with purpose, or ceremonial spaces, right? You were inspired to do that.
Yes.
How do you bring this scholarly approach to psychology that you have to how you run Opulent Temple / parties?
Right. Yeah, and that's an evolving tale for sure. When I first started participating in the dance music culture and scene, it was late '98. I had been living in San Francisco for a few years. I was going to grad school. I was not connected to that scene at all. I was much more of a rocker.
Mm-hmm.
But some friends took me to a club and um, had some great experiences in that scene and culture, and kept going. So if you're going to underground parties long enough in San Francisco, you're certainly going to hear about Burning Man, and you meet
Mm-hmm.
people that say, hey, you should go. And so I finally did in 2001. And during that time, I would say it was a particular kind of golden age of San Francisco dance culture, in as much as it was like during the first .com boom. There
Mm.
was a lot of fresh energy in the city. There was a lot of like a wave of people moving to the city, a lot of people doing ecstasy at the time. And so that like collective happy vibe happening at a mass scale, had a certain um, value. And I wanted to sort of harness what I thought was like really positive energy being created in those spaces towards some intentional like purpose. And so for me, that looked two different ways. One was a tangible way of using a party as a fundraiser for a cause.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is how I got involved in throwing parties. The first party I ever threw was a benefit for the group home I worked for at the time, which was a nonprofit out of San Francisco General for kids, um, who had just been the like quintessential tales of urban trauma. And so they were in residential care because they had no parents who could care for them, or they were too out of control at home to be cared for by parents. And so I wanted to fundraise using events for good causes. And we continued for a bit doing a series of events called Raise Up, and they were for a different charity every time. And so there was kind of that effort to channel it towards something good. But I also tried, and tried's a tricky word because I did it, but I rarely was I ever satisfied with the outcome. And that is to basically do a midnight ceremony. And that used to be a much bigger part of my events back in the day, where we would stop the music, get everyone in the main room of the dance floor to try to have this intentional moment where you do some like grounding exercise or guided meditation or like group om, or part performance, part ceremony. And and I did that in settings that it was just straight like ridiculous that I was even trying it. Like I tried it at a rave in Fresno called Cyberfest, um, which is just not the scene to try and do that. But I was so idealistic / naive / stupid / brave. I was trying to do it anyways. And that was just my effort to, raise the frequency, so to speak. That was a crew I actually used to be associated with. They were called Raise the Frequency. And it was very much aligned with that idea to try to use those elevated party moments to have a higher level of shared consciousness take place than just was already happening with the music. And as time has gone on, I have shied away from that because
Why is that?
I mean, honestly, like from one perspective, I just chickened out.
Mm.
It's hard to do and have it feel like everyone's with you.
Mm.
And maybe another perspective would be I got wise, right? And I still do take the mic at certain parties and try to have a certain moment, but most cases these days that's in the form of some very brief words of like setting the intention. Hey, this is why we're here. Even just a couple weeks ago, playing at Burning Man for our Wednesday night annual white party that we call Sacred Dance,
Mm-hmm.
because that is a big part of the purpose. You can hear me on the recording saying, hey, we're here with a purpose. The purpose is to be a mass joy generator in the hopes that you will take that joy back into the rest of your life and spread some light. And just kind of like, that's about it in terms of trying to set a higher intention with the moment. Now, I've also tried to, and again, I shouldn't say try because I have, but it's always a varying degree of effectiveness, to use the social capital that comes with a large email list and a website that people are looking at and a Facebook page that people are looking at. To, especially in my weekly newsletter on my emails, I'll talk about all kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with parties. And some of that's about politics, national events, themes of consciousness and relationship to oneself that I know people respond to varying degrees of like, ignore it, or, oh my God, you're brilliant, or.
Well, actually, on that note, what do you hope to accomplish in sharing the various aspect of your own consciousness?
I hope
with
to
your
accomplish
mailing?
anything.
You what?
I hope to accomplish anything.
Anything.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if any of this has a lasting effect on someone's life path and consciousness and flow of ideas. I would like to think it does. I certainly would like to think that it does more than if I didn't do it at all. I certainly think it's fair to say I'm the only promoter / DJ / camp organizer using his platform for any discussion of anything, let alone consciousness, politics, and some attempt at right living. But I also, as you can probably tell, don't totally feel satisfied with the extent to which I've used the platform for that. But it's a really fine line. It's easy to get turned off by someone like yapping at you,
right?
Talking about this stuff.
Yeah, it's I think the best teacher that I have come to appreciate are people who live it, instead of just lecturing at me.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think if you live this lifestyle, if you truly embody it, you don't just pontificate on social media, in your newsletters, I think that is the greatest inspiration of all. And another reason why I want to talk to you, right? A child psychologist and a Burning Man organizer, because I don't know, but I recently found out that most camp organizers lose money when they run camps. Rarely
Sure.
they're black.
Sure.
So it's a labor of love that
Yes.
you're trying to gift to the playa,
Yes.
So
yeah. I mean, in the quotient of time is money, I've certainly lost a lot of money by how much time I have spent on it. And no doubt it is a labor of love. And as you mentioned, like, I have my other production wing, Opel Productions, and Opel existed a little bit longer than Opulent Temple and is my vehicle to throw parties in San Francisco. I still consider them parties with purpose, because there is a certain intention that I bring to the kind of vibe that we want to create with the crowd. And I do still use messaging on visuals and the platform of my social media assets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, what have you, as well as my newsletter, to talk about things beyond parties. But if an Opel party makes money, I make money. If an Opel party loses money, I lose money. Whereas any Opulent Temple event is a fundraiser for the camp. And if it loses money, that's not my money, that's the camp's money.
Yeah.
Which does happen, not very often, thank goodness, but it does happen.
Yeah. On that note, some people may consider these type of events to be churches or church-esque, right?
Yeah.
It's a very cathartic experience when they dance all night. So it's as you said, it's a fine balance between lecturing at someone
Yeah,
versus just giving them the space to have their own cathartic experience, whatever that may be. How do you find that line? Because
yeah,
I don't know if you noticed already. I like to emphasize certain things. I like to make things very explicit versus letting things go into the subtle nuance understanding. Wink, wink. I think you got
yeah,
it right.
yeah.
So I tend to be a little bit more heavy handed. Anyways, I'm curious to know your thoughts about creating a container of transformation while providing the entertaining value that brought people to your events, so forth.
Right. Yeah, and that's certainly evolved over time. In my early days of throwing events, my Opel parties, almost every party would have some kind of midnight moment. And now it's definitely more limited to a few special events. And, some are very tailor made for that, like our Opulent Temple event called Sacred Dance, which
Mm-hmm.
is like a white costume party,
Mm-hmm.
with a burner twist that we do in various cities every year: LA, SF, Seattle, and Denver.
Oh, great. Let me
Yeah,
know when you're in LA next time. I
I
definitely will be
will.
there. Yeah,
I
yeah.
will. And that part has a very explicit intention. It is sacred dance. It is to, create this magic looking, magic feeling vibe, in which people can hopefully um, touch a part of their spirit and their heart within the context of community and dance to kind of have a peak experience. And so having some words, moments, or extras around that stuff is like well within the frame of the event. But then there's other events I do that really it's just a party. And that's not to like, diminish it, because I absolutely feel that there's value in community and fun and connection in music. And certainly for a lot of regular clubbers, like that is the closest thing they get to church.
Mm,
Because I think a big reason people go to church is to feel community and
mm.
feel their heart, feel their spirit within the teachings of whatever that spiritual approach might be. And even without the explicit words connected to it, I think just having that shared musical experience um, within the kind of universal beat of dance music is definitely as close to church as a lot of people get.
Actually, if you don't mind, I want to double click on that real quick because your overall goal is to you personal is to tap into the internal nature of being a human, right? And some so the monastics type people would say, "Oh, parties is too, I don't know, materialistic, too common ground.
Right.
You need to do the monastic approach to
Yeah.
reach that higher state." And some people may say, well, no, as you said earlier, this is the closest they're going to get that communal feel vibes as a gateway to their spiritual awakening, whatever. So how do you say to the what do you say to the naysayers, the critics of like, this is too, I don't know, too much
Yeah.
fun
Right.
versus
Uh,
yeah.
I would say a few things. Number one, I would say often they're right. I mean, there no doubt there are a lot of parties that look like what I would call like a cheeseball fest of ego-driven nonsense. And if you go out on a regular basis, you can certainly start to tell the difference between the cheeseball stuff and the more what I would consider, materialistic and unconscious party people compared to what I think can fairly be considered a more friendly, down to earth, stripped down vibe that isn't there for all those same reasons. Now, of course, I'm not trying to paint a picture of um, some kind of elitism within dance music parties, because even at what I would consider those more stripped down, um, just about the music events, I'm sure a majority of people that are just there to drink and party and have a good time. But I do think being around, if you want to call it, like enough other quality people, like of a certain mindset and orientation in terms of how they treat each other, that you have a better opportunity to have that kind of good vibe experience that you would hope to have. And I certainly would also advocate there has to be balance too. Like you definitely still need your quiet, contemplative outlets, however you find those, walking, reading, meditating, yoga, exercise, what have you. I would certainly not advocate anyone to just try clubbing as their spiritual outlet.
I think that could be a tagline in itself. Clubbing as a spiritual path, right? It's a T-shirt. I'm sure it's gonna sell a lot.
Right, but not too much of it.
Well, actually, I have a moment I wanted to share with you. So there I was out in the playa, and I'm walking by myself, right, doing the contemplative mode, and then all of a sudden I hear this music with a human voice, that was chanting. I believe it was Friday night. I don't remember who was doing this. And I walked over, and it was Opulent Temple. I was like, oh, this is my kind of music. This is my vibe right now, being contemplative, but at the same time, I want to celebrate life as well. So I just wanted to share that moment with you.
Nice.
So when you do these type of camps, it's a heroic effort to fundraise, to organize operations, to recruit top DJ talents. Each one, I assume, is takes something. So how many people are at camp? And if you don't mind, characterize, it is a working camp. You do this out of a community effort. It's not a plug and play camp. So just describe a little bit of what is Opulent Temple and what did it take to actually bring forth this gift to the playa.
Yeah, right on. It certainly exists solely because of the awesome team that has grown with our camp over time. And, I'm the chief cat herder, if you want to call it that. And I'm the primary, vision holder and fundraiser and make the lineup. But I don't, luckily, do a lot of the doing that has to be done to make our production as awesome as it is. We have a core team that has been with us for years and years, and everyone has a certain skill set. People that fabricate, like our visual screens this year, our DJ booth another year, our fire effects and their ongoing maintenance year after year, the big stage platforms that are out in the crowd that kind of give us that little amphitheater effect. All those things were made by our team members and continue to kind of be held by different people as the ones that make it happen. And without them, Opulent Temple wouldn't happen. You take one or two people off that team, and our camp does not look the same. It's not as cool. It's not. It doesn't have as much to offer. So our team is amazing, and we're really lucky to have this almost kind of family tribal vibe amongst us of people that still want to keep doing it.
How many people is that core team?
Yeah, that core team, I think we are 13 on the core team. And then there's kind of another tier of, essential people. That's probably another 10 to 15. And then we have a certain amount of just what we call kind of worker bees that show up, and we absolutely need them to make it happen. But they're a bit more diverse in terms of their skill sets, and we can tell them, to go move one pile from one place to another, which is something we do a lot at Burning
So
Man.
13, 13, 13, roughly 25, and then how many others? The worker bees, you said?
Right. So then we'll probably have around 60 working members
Uh-huh. Got
who
it.
also help with setup.
Yeah.
And then we have another, you know, around 50 people who don't help with setup but do help with strike.
Mm.
And then we have another group that isn't committed to help with setup or strike, but they still have to plug themselves in some kind of participatory fashion with
Like
just
what?
running the nightly dance parties every night and like hosting and keeping an eye on things and other ways that they can support the effort.
So about 150 people to put the production all together.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, do you track how many people have gone through or flow through the
No,
Opulent Temple?
I could go back and figure it out, but I couldn't tell you what that number is offhand.
No, I mean visitors. I don't mean the
Oh, I see. Like
totality.
visitors on a nightly basis.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I also don't have much of an idea. I mean, this past year, which was a really, great year for us in terms of our nights, um, Wednesday and Friday were probably the biggest, though every night had a great crowd and, 5 to 7,000 at one time, but a little hard to tell, because the sound system really travels and
Mm-hmm.
people are hanging out, like enjoying what's happening without being right in that inner circle. Like,
Or people like me who heard the sound and then follow the sound and found Opulent Temple.
right, right,
Uh, so what's the dream though? What you have 150 people, you got thousands of people coming to Opulent Temple, enjoying this music, and maybe heard a little bit of the cryptid message that's of the high vibes that you embedded,
right,
through your chants.
right.
What's the dream?
Yeah. Um, I mean, the dream really is kind of what I mentioned earlier to provide, um, whether you want to call it peak experience or mass joy generation
Mm,
or um, real bonded happiness,
mm,
with your peeps or people you just meet on the dance floor,
mm,
and that I really hope that those peak experiences are taken back to their life and they have more to give,
mm,
whether it be to their friends, family, or community, that
mm.
something, good comes out of all of our effort to put on this party other than just the fun in that moment.
You've been doing this for 20 some years, right? 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So with 20 years, thousands of people every night, really, that's a lot of people. Um, do you collect transformational stories or moments that people email you or videos or testimonials? I don't know, these type
Mm.
of moments. So then when the org is giving you hassle or when certain things didn't really pan out, you can
Or
look
we
at your
just step in it.
yeah, or you can look at your file and say, yeah, yeah, that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, that is a very good idea. I have not coalesced stuff like that in a way that I could easily reference. But the recent drama that we had that I shared with you,
Mm,
um, certainly it was heartening to read all the positive feedback in some of those threads alongside some of the negative feedback. And certainly the positive by far outnumbered the negative.
mm.
But as we are human, it's hard not to focus on that negative stuff and get stuck there, rather than let it be balanced or even overwhelmed by all the positive stuff. But certainly, um, there's been a lot more positive than negative.
So 20 years of history doing this through the highs and lows of dealing with Burning Man, also the attendees, also behind the scenes, also the DJs. What would you maybe share with us some of the highlights, the moments of your greatest joy? Like, oh, this is worth all the effort, all the headache, all the
Right.
heartache
Yes.
These two stories is why I do this. Is there anything like that?
Hmm. I don't know that I have a really great illustrative story in the way that I think you're asking, but I certainly do find myself before Burning Man at the peak moments of stress thinking, and I'll tell my wife this, like, man, I hope there's that moment where it all comes together and that I feel like this was worth all the shite that it took to get here. And honestly, there was this year, and it was Wednesday night, which is to me our most important night because of the kind of increased intentionality around the sacred dance angle. And it has been an annual event that we've done at OT since our very first camp in 2003, in which I was standing on one of the side stages and just taking it all in. And, everything was just popping off in the way you hoped it would, with the 4 visual screens and the 4 lasers and the 23 fire effects and the really great sound system and, Carl Cox and then John Summit in the booth and just packed house and surrounded by art cars and just like so many happy people, like so many smiles and just that really like tangible wave of positivity that are the kind of moments that definitely feed me and I know feed our team to make it feel like it's worth it. And certainly you'll hear stories down the road like, oh, I met my husband at Opulent Temple, or people come to get married on our stages at sunset because they have some connection to us, and those are really lovely, and those feel really good. And
Mm,
certainly, like, I feel like the sort of feedback loop with the community is such that, you know, we have to raise all of our own money. And if people don't
mhm.
come to our fundraisers, there is no camp. There is, no stage. And the feedback loop that we get just through the attendance of our events, often many of which are not headliner driven. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. Um, that continued level of support with people coming to our fundraisers definitely makes you feel like, okay, we're doing something right. The people continue to be with us. Um, our success from their participation can continue to be channeled into this effort.
So, a side question as a psychologist who is all about the self-perception, right? Optimizing that. Do you then teach your, core 25 to anchor those moments when they are there, so then they're more anti-fragile for the more difficult moments?
Honestly, most of them don't need the reminder,
Mm,
um, which is not to say I don't do it anyways, um, because I know that I do, you know, give them that, big man hug usually and be like, dude, take this in, look around. You made this happen. There's a lot of happy people here. Just take it in. And I know it's hard for me, and I know it's hard for a lot of people to allow yourself those moments, um, because that's just kind of the overall style of a lot of our team, uh, to really soak it in and bask for a second. Yeah.
mm. Were there any moments in the 20 years history where you seriously question yourself why, or even maybe your wife will remind you, why are you doing this?
Oh yeah,
All this
absolutely.
time, all this money, all this stress,
Oh
time
yeah.
away from our family, or any low moments where you seriously question, like, man, I don't know if I
Yeah.
want to do this anymore.
Well, the obvious one is a project we did in 2007 in which myself and a crew um, spent all summer working on this thing that was supposed to be this big bamboo dome.
Mm,
And then we got out to Burning Man, and structurally it just failed. It didn't work. And so a whole summer's worth of work and a whole lot of money was basically for naught. Um, and so that was pretty heartbreaking. And then having to strike at the end of that week after a very hard week and it was one of those whiteout strike days where you're just getting beaten down, by a whiteout, where you're having to muster the energy to clean up a project that didn't even work in the first place. Those are certainly moments where you're like, fuck this shit.
Fuck this. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's burn this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think our powers of repression work pretty well, because we tend to forget the worst memories. But honestly, like even last week, with some of the criticism that we were taking, that I felt, some of which was really low and unfair, there were certainly moments where you think to yourself, like, I don't need this shit. This is not even worth it. And I think those are normal responses to taking some punches that most likely will go away. I think
meditate enough, doing yoga enough,
or someone
ayahuasca ceremony enough, then
happiness is a short memory.
Yeah. I mean, it is a service position. I mean, if I'm just reading the stuff, and then I'm reading some of the articles, and I can tell that this really is a labor of love. So when you try your best to give your best, and other people still criticize, which comes with the territory, right?
Yeah.
So,
and in the case of last week, some of it we deserved, which is fine, but some of it was taken to a level that we did not deserve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, you are a psychologist, you are an entrepreneur, you run Opel Productions, and you do this service projects. So what are some of the top lessons that you have learned from running Opulent Temple?
Well, I don't know if it's chicken or egg in terms of philosophy versus lessons learned. But one of the things I definitely come back to is what I would consider the central teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu fable text, which is do what you love and do it your best, but then give it to God, which I think a simpler way of saying it is don't be attached to the outcome, which is the ultimate difficulty. Because the more you invest your time, energy, and spirit in something, of course, you're going to be attached to the outcome. It's a really, really difficult thing not to do. But I really have come to, I come back to that all the time, because we are doing what we love, and we have to do it for the reasons that feed our heart. And of course, we care about what happens, but there's absolutely a point that you really have to just let it go. You just have to, or you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Okay, so on that note, that lesson, right? You could really teach the younger Syd, or the younger CK, or the current CK even. I'll just be honest, right? How do you do that? Because it's easy to say, and then I've seen that lesson over and over again.
Yeah.
But in the moment of stress, right? You pour your heart into a thing,
Yeah.
and cross your fingers for the best outcome.
Yeah.
Maybe in the early, few hours or even few minutes, there's like that angst of like, I wonder if, right? So how do you learn to just surrender and let go?
Well, I think your suffering has to teach you something. Your suffering has to light your way, because pain is a messenger. You cut your hand cutting carrots, it hurts. Your body's telling you, yo, put a Band-Aid on it, whatever. Psychic pain and emotional pain is often the same general idea. You're suffering because you're too attached to something. You're suffering because your relationship to it is unhealthy. And there has to be lessons in the suffering, and let the suffering teach you something. And often in this case, in this example, it's that you're too wrapped up in this thing that you put your time and energy into. And again, obviously that is totally inevitable, but there are levels to this, right? There are healthy levels and there are unhealthy levels.
What's the distinction? Healthy versus unhealthy?
I think only the individual can answer that for themselves. And that's, just based on where you at. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you full of angst? Are you satisfied, unsatisfied? Like, I think those would be just like the loose barometers that I would ask someone to look at if they're going through it.
One thing that I talk about with my audience is the persistence of it, because
Mm,
the emotions, positive or negative, washes over us like waves of the ocean. It's
mhm.
normal to have not only positive or negative. I don't want just one or the other. I want everything, right? Because I'm a full human being. But if I start to relive certain emotions, positive or
Yeah,
negative, typically negative, over and over again, that's a red flag for me to like, oh, okay, there's probably some attachment that I'm holding on to too tight.
that's right. No, that's a good one. Yeah. If it keeps popping up for you in all kinds of situations outside the one that you happen to be in, then certainly it's lingering.
How so for aspirational camp organizers, they look at Opulent Temple and say, wow, I really admire them. They set the standards for me for sound camps or any camps at all, because you enroll top, talents to come on your stage. And then like, how do they get those top talents for free?
Mhm.
How do you what would you say to the younger camp organizers who look at you guys as the standard?
Hmm. That's a good question. Well, I would probably, in part, emphasize the need to play the long game in the sense of it has to be grown. You can't just try to be where we are. That took us, 19, 20 years,
Hmm.
in just a few years. Um, it takes time and consistency and patience. And certainly it absolutely matters who you surround yourself with. And you,
So on that note, is there any tactical advice about like, hey, here's a test that I give to someone who may potentially be a teammate that I
yeah,
trust versus not? Is there
yeah.
anything tactical you can give
Well,
this
we've
person?
certainly gone through iterations of our team. And of course, there's been periods of internal conflict and drama. But especially early, I would be willing to put up with a toxic person who had a lot of talents,
Hmm.
because talent's hard to come by within a volunteer scenario of a very difficult venture of going out to the desert and building shit and then taking
Hmm.
it away and having to deal with it all year long. Uh,
Hmm.
but I would not make that trade-off anymore,
Hmm.
because a few toxic people can blow up the whole thing, and their talents are not worth it if they're going to blow up your whole crew.
How do you test that before you arrive to the very harsh environment that is the playa?
And I don't know that there is any tester besides person. So, uh, but I think there's something to the adage that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right?
Mm,
So that if you go to one Burning Man and there's drama and stupidity, don't trick yourself that that's just an anomaly. And it might be, right? There's always a but, there's always an exception. But in my experience, it's usually um, gonna rear its head again in some fashion. And don't just try to talk yourself out of it because they're good at this one thing that every camp might really need. Because again, it's not worth it. Go find someone else that's good at that thing that doesn't have all the personal drama.
mm. What other things would you say to aspirational camp organizers? So long game, select your team
Yeah,
carefully,
yeah,
cautiously. and look at
Yeah.
their past. What else?
Yeah. Well, leadership is tricky because um, it's a leader's duty to get out in front and set the pace and to motivate. And it's also a leader's responsibility to get out of the way and let people do the things that they're good at and that they want to do. And that's certainly an area of lesson and development that I continue to, I'm sure, not be perfect at, of course, but I'm certainly oriented to trying to set the stage for people to like do the thing that fulfills them and but then get out of their way and just let them do it and not be all micromanagey about it.
Okay. What else?
Yeah. I feel like there's so many. Um, well, also certainly believe in um, the I guess what's that saying? Enthusiasm is contagious, meaning like your vibe as a leader is contagious. And so what kind of vibe are you putting forth is really going to attract certain kinds of people to you and repel other kinds of people. And of course, there's lots of different leadership styles and there's lots of different things that people are attracted to. Um, but it certainly, I think, is in terms of group dynamics, it's really helpful to have someone who's, willing to set a certain kind of tone that makes it fun for people to be there. Again, especially in the context of everyone's working for free in a very harsh environment with questionable returns.
Do
Yeah.
you have anyone who's around you so when you get into a grumpy mode, they can like knock knock, hey, you're being a little grumpy. Is there anyone like that? Do you think that's a
Besides my
good?
wife?
Is that your wife?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So she's part of the core team.
No, she's not, but she has to live it anyways.
She's the oh man, what's the word I'm looking for? She didn't volunteer herself.
Yeah, exactly.
You
Yeah,
volunteer her.
yeah.
Got it.
But there's certainly people within the core team that I lean on when I'm reaching my limits. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And other times I just need to be a good actor.
Oh, okay. So actually on that note, real quick. Um Part of building an intentional camp, the idea is everything you touch is a amplifier of how you experience in this moment, right? That's sort of the idea, right? So if you're pissed off right now, you've built the thing is gonna reverberate that energy outward. So it's um but most camp leads wanted just to build a thing. They don't really care about how it's built. They just wanted to build the thing, right? So how do you, for your own leadership style,
Yeah,
encourage people to maintain that, right? That joy
yeah,
when they build the infrastructure of massive joy machine.
yeah. And honestly, this particular point, I'm super keen on this point because to me it absolutely matters the vibe under which something is done.
Mm,
And there was a time in our history that I wanted to step away a little bit because I was getting a little burnt out. And the people that wanted to step up, um, although they were effective doers, the manner in which they did their doing was contrary to the kind of vibe that's important to me. They were a little too harsh, impatient, yelling at people. Um, and you might at the end of your build have exactly the same looking camp, but the experience to get there was miserable for way more people. Like I'm not down with that. And in that particular example, I stepped back in to an extent that I didn't want to because I was just feeling like the vibe that was permeating the effort
mm-hmm,
was not one of fun and joy.
mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be involved with, like an effort that doesn't have that.
So I'm the person who like to make things very explicit. Like I said, perhaps a little too heavy-handed. And then in the way my men's group we do this is we call this context, right? So I will actually make the context very explicit.
Hmm.
Hey, this is meant to be a place of joy, for example.
Yeah.
I'll say that out loud to everyone. So that way it's clear, like this is the intention that we're, the vibe, the intention, the way of being that we're doing to infuse this infrastructure all around. How do you just keep it in your head? Do you make it very explicit to everyone or just to your wife? Like, how do you
Yeah.
manage that vibe?
I feel like I make it explicit. I'm notoriously long-winded in my email communications
Uh huh.
because I have so much to say. And part of that is definitely built around trying to set the frame of the effort. Like, why are we here? What are we doing? And how are we trying to do it?
Mm,
And I definitely um, use, word time and air time to try and set that intention in the same way that, like, it sounds like you do in your men's group.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Um, Last question is so one thing when I was speaking to the architect of the temple this year, he
Hmm.
told me that hey, most people don't know the amount of financial resources to bring a massive architecture like that to the playa. You know, he said it cost about $600,000 to actually make that happen. So, what are some of the other challenges, right? If you can advise the younger Sid, the CK who aspired, who is inspired by Opulent Temple, say, I really want to have a camp that's aspirationally do something similar. What is something that you wish you had known 20 years ago?
Mm. Well, I could take this in a few directions, but the first thing that comes to mind is I, at certain points in my younger development as a Burning Man camp organizer, did think that the Burning Man org would at some point care about what we did enough to help us.
Hmm.
And there was one point in which we got together a few sound camps and we kind of formally went to Burning Man with some requested changes to how they interface with theme camps. And not just sound camps, but theme camps, because uh, if you know the event, you know that they have tried to frame what they're doing as an arts festival and to a lesser degree, a community experience. They absolutely don't want it associated with a music festival, and they will take pains to tell you it is not a music festival. Even though I think it's fair to say a lot of people go to Burning Man because they love and anticipate there being all kinds of amazing musical experiences to be had, whether that's from certain theme camp, art car, whatever. But I certainly used to think that we would essentially change their minds about their lack of support. That did not happen. And they've been pretty consistent in that regard. And that's been, you know, understandable and still unfortunate because there are some things that I think they could do that wouldn't be that hard, that would make our lives a little bit easier.
Like what? Like what?
Well, for example, any person who wants to bring an art piece can apply for a grant to get some financial help with the construction and related costs to bring that art to the playa. If it's on the open playa. If we as a theme camp make a new art piece, we cannot apply for an art grant because the art is in the theme camp and not on the open playa. It's a very small distinction. And so,
Mm,
for example, we've asked for the ability to apply for art grants and be judged on the same merits of the art as other artists are, but with the understanding the art is going to be in our theme camp. And this is theme camp that's, on the frontage of either Esplanade or 10 and 2, right? It's still very much in my mind in the public domain. That seems like a pretty straightforward thing to allow us to apply for art grants. And, the answer has been no.
mm.
there's other logistical things that they could do to make our lives easier with vendors and deliveries and logistics support that we need to operate. And that hasn't gone in the direction we hoped it would.
Mm.
And that's not to say they don't do anything, but there's certainly more they could do if they chose to. I think in their mind, it's, you know, very much, I guess you would say it's a seller's market, meaning if we don't like it, we don't have to be there. And, you know, they would probably say, thank you for your service, Opulent Temple. Have a nice day, knowing that, you know, there's going to be plenty of other sound camps out there providing a place for people to dance. And so they could take it or leave it.
Are there such a demand to become sound camps? I don't know, 150 people at a time willing to take on the responsibility, the labor, the time, the fundraising to, I mean, I don't know of any. So
Yeah.
are
Well, I
there
mean,
lots of sound
it
camps
seems
that
like
wanted to?
there's enough dance music out there, right? I mean, I think that's fair to say. If you walked around 10 and 2 and saw the other camps, be it, you know, Camp Question Mark or Playground or Alchemist or Casbah, or of course, you know, the Upteen art cars that have really good sound on them now. You know, they're not hurting for dance music. If anything, I'm sure they think there's too much of it and they wish there was less thumpa thumpa out there, which in some ways I can relate to because, you know, the theme camps stay put and everyone knows that they're out on that outer rim pointing their sound at the open playa for a reason. Whereas, you know, our car, of course, might drive anywhere and blast things in various directions that people don't really like. Well, you know, which I understand.
What are you excited about? Since you've been there for 20 years, I know that you self-describe as a, what do you call yourself? The jaded Burning Man, right? You
The
self-describe
jaded burner, yes,
the jaded burner,
yeah,
correct? So
absolutely a jaded
so
burner.
as a self-described jaded burner, what are you excited about in the
Yeah,
upcoming,
great
burn in
question.
the future? Because I
I
mean, I
mean,
would say this is year 3 for me. The novelty, I mean, I still love Burning Man. Don't get me wrong. The novelty has gone down.
sure.
What has gone up is the potentiality of serendipities and the human connections, the human content I'm more excited about. So
Yeah,
that's me,
yeah,
20-year veteran who's been, around the conscious party scenes for a long time. What are you excited about? What are you looking forward to?
yeah. I mean, no doubt there's less Burning Mans ahead of us than behind us. You know, we can only keep up this effort for so long. I don't know how long. It certainly won't be another 20 years. And it's not that we've seen
Oh,
it
you
all.
don't think it's going to be another 20 years?
I do not. No,
Oh, wow. So you
I
see
don't
the
think I'll
sort of
do this till I'm
the
70.
oh, you personally.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay. Just
Yeah.
wanted
I
to.
mean, like in terms of Opulent Temple showing up and doing its thing, which is not to say that we, you know, as our present generation of team couldn't slowly but surely hand it off to other folks to take it over. That's not out of the question. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't have, you know, so much hubris to say we've seen it all. You know, there's always, of course, more things to see and get excited about. But the things that I still do get excited about are certainly down to a smaller list of things that sustain, and those really special nights full of thousands of happy people, you know, dancing to a unified moment. That still excites me, even if it's redundant to, you know, what has taken place year after year. It's still exciting. And, you know, I suppose in an offshoot way, I'm excited at the prospect of what other cool live acts we could have, because we've been DJ driven 99.9% of the time. But this year we had our first actual rock band,
Mm.
which was a band out of Rochester, New York called King Buffalo. And they're like not dance music oriented at all. They are like a bluesy, sludgy, heavy rock band. But I totally love them. And they played Tuesday night, and they sounded phenomenal. And it definitely got me thinking, like, wouldn't that be fun to go after other live acts in the same way I have gone out and tried to recruit DJs, under the freedom that exists when you don't pay them. Like, when there's no money, you can ask anyone, because the
Who?
worst they'll say,
Okay. All right. All
the
right.
worst they'll say is no.
So right. So on that note, who, like, the artists that you know today, who would be like, I would love to have this artist on my stage next year?
Sure. Well, I asked Tool,
Uh,
but the manager I was emailing ignored my many emails, which obviously him saying, "Oh my God, piss off."
yeah.
So Tool would be great. Metallica, Jane's Addiction, Nine Inch Nails. I suppose bands from my older rocker days that are still at it. That would be very exciting. I mean, there's a lot in that realm, but those are the ones that off the top of my head would be extra fun to at least ask.
One, actually, on that note, one key lesson that I learned this year for me personally is, how Henry Thoreau, American writer, he said,
Walden
not,
Pond, yeah.
that's right. He said, most people live in the world, live in a life of quiet desperation. And on the way to Burning Man, I discern with my friend, if you're unclear about your desires, if you don't express your desires, if you don't take action around your desires, if you are attached to your desires, these four things are recipes to a life of quiet desperation. So to your point earlier, that if you don't ask, you don't get. So since is decommodify, what's the damage? So ask. And
Exactly.
that's a recipe for a life of fulfillment.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. You lose nothing by asking.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about the lessons that you've learned that cross over to the default world, to your practice, to your marriage? Anything you wanted to highlight?
I mean, the bonds that have been made over time within the co-creation of Opulent Temple year after year has definitely been special. And, my crew, our team, they're like family, and we've gone through stuff together that, you pretty irreplaceable. And, I guess, want to say I really appreciate them and love them.
And would you have been able to establish that bond had it not for been for Opulent Temple?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's like being in a foxhole with someone, going through really difficult times and really joyous times. Definitely the kind of situation that is pretty limited in its possibilities of happening in the way that it has happened.
It's a beautiful way to end it. Any last words you want to say to the younger Syd or CK?
Get more sleep.
Just in general or on the
Oh, I don't know. I actually have a complicated relationship with sleep only because I'm so dang busy, between all the things. But I
just
like
in general or at Burning Man only?
just in general. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
just in general. But there are certainly times that it's time to just put it down and get some rest. Yeah.
Get more sleep.
Yeah.
Syd, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective. We went places that I wasn't expecting at all, but I so appreciate you bringing your spirituality to Burning Man camps, operations, and the lessons that you have garnered and give it to future camp organizers. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk all kinds of interesting shop with you. Really some of my favorite topics.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Let me end broadcast.